Thanks for tuning in to Thoughts for Tuesday, hosted by Bates Communications, a podcast series about business trends and leadership insights from the experts.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Suzanne Bates, and today I am with Tim Hebert. When I met Tim, he was CEO of Atrion, where he was CEO for 29 years. And the company grew from 0 to 168 million with an average growth rate of 22% year over year. The company was recently acquired by Carousel Industries. Congratulations,
Thank
Tim.
you.
And you now have a new venture, which I'm going to ask you to tell us about in just a moment. But welcome. It's good to have you here.
I'm glad to be here as well. Thank you.
One of the reasons that I was so interested in speaking with you is because, of course, you're an interesting guy, which we'll get into in a moment, but also you really have an amazing growth story to tell. And so many of our listeners are interested in the question of how is it that we drive growth? Even in a growth economy, it's not that easy. Competition is stiff. Technology is changing. You know a lot about technology. So I wonder if you could start just by sharing with me a little bit of your own story. How was it that you were able to drive 22% growth year over year?
Yeah, I think that, for us it was kind of a long journey. And if you look at the history of our company, we kind of went through 3 stages. And every stage as the CEO and leaders of the business, we had to kind of learn new skills and leadership styles to be able to be successful. Our first decade or so, I would say that we were really the entrepreneurial. The 2 guys that started the business that were having fun doing it. We really didn't have huge aspirations. And when you have to start with nothing, growing at remarkable rates is pretty easy, right? Doubling business year after year when you're at $100,000 your first year is pretty easy. And so for us, we naturally just grew. We didn't really think a lot about growth. It just kind of happened very organically. We then had our second decade where I think we realized that we needed to really mature. I mean, become a small business, and no longer this entrepreneurial startup kind of mentality. And it took a lot of soul searching for both my business partner and myself to really understand what it takes to be a successful small business. And part of that was being more focused on the organization, more focused on empowering the organization so the team could do more. We found in the first part of that transition that we were still the 2-man show. We had a tendency of not delegating or empowering our teams nearly enough. And we grew, but we grew the hard way. And it was hard. A lot of effort that was on our backs just to make it happen. Once we got past that first 4 or 5 years, we really started getting the empowerment portion down. And as we brought the whole collective team together, we saw our growth start to accelerate. And it's been an uphill ride ever since then. The last decade was a little bit different. We really focused on how do we become a high growth organization. And we started by creating this vision that there was a growth imperative. And we basically were clear about that to everyone that we worked with, all our employees, our partners, our clients. And we were really clear on defining how and why growth was so important to us. We were very selective on how we grew. We weren't just going to take any client. We weren't going to sell just any product. We weren't looking at volume in the transaction. We were looking at quality and long-term relationships. So as we started to build how we were going to grow, then it really became who we were going to actually grow with. And so we really selected a growth model that says, listen, we're going to sell to fewer clients, we're going to sell them more, and we're going to be more focused on quality than just the number of transactions. And for us, that allowed us to really kind of find our niche. It allowed us to be very focused, and it allowed us to provide a unbelievable client service experience to our clients. So it was more than just a customer buying from a supplier. It was really kind of a strategic partnership that we created. And the client were invested in our success and we were invested in their success. And that was it was an interesting journey watching and looking back on it now because you can actually see these almost inflection points that occurred. And we had to learn some lessons along the way as well. So it wasn't always as clean as it sounds in retrospect, but looking back, it was highly successful over the 30 years.
Well, one of the things that you have done so successfully is recognize when you get to those inflection points. There's plenty of data out there that shows fast-growing companies disappear or get absorbed by other companies because they can't sustain the growth. It's something like 2/3 of the fastest growing companies. So you were able to recognize those inflection points. You may have been in some pain
Oh, yes.
in some interim period, but how did you embrace the idea that probably you had to change first and then the organization had to change?
So I use an analogy or a metaphor quite often. I talk about monkey bars, right? And I talk about navigating monkey bars. And when you're young and you get to the monkey bars for the first time, it's an effort to jump up and grab that first bar, and you're just glad you got there, right? I think a lot of small business owners and entrepreneurs, that for them is the excitement. But then it's important what you do next. And what you always have to do when you're navigating the monkey bars is you have to be willing to let go of something. That something you're letting go is usually something that defines you. And if you have a super high ego, you don't have the humility, you don't have the self-awareness, it's hard to let go of that thing that's defined you. For me, one of the biggest challenges I had always been the most technical person every place I worked. And I got to a point with Atrion, I couldn't grow and still be the most technical person. I had to let go of that distinction. And it was hard because in that case, it was probably 20 years of my life had been defined around that. And I think a lot of executives have a hard time realizing that, to accept that, and to realize that you have to move in a different direction. And so you always have to let go as you're reaching forward. And that was a big thing I kind of learned at a very young age, and it's kind of followed through. And what I was really good at, I think that helped me along the way, I was really good at talking to a lot of people. I spent a lot of time talking to my clients, understanding where they were, where the markets were going. I spent time with our suppliers in the technology industry, understanding where they were looking at the world going. So I felt I had my fingers on the pulse of what was needed next. And it wasn't what was needed in the next 3 months. I was really looking at a horizon that was more like 5 years. So sometimes as you're making those changes, people are saying, well, why are we having to do this? But it was to get to a point that was 3 to 5 years down the road. And so I think being able to look forward and being able to let go of those things that defined you really helped us kind of navigate that. And like you said, it wasn't easy all the time. Sometimes it was painful. Sometimes, you didn't quite catch it the right way, and, it was a little bit more challenging. You had to do a lot of heavy lifting to get back on track. But I think that allowed us to kind of continue to grow, and we would still be growing if we were independently owned today.
I know one of your missions has always been not technology for technology's sake, but technology to help a company, one of your client companies, all of your client companies, execute their strategies and grow. So I'm guessing that over the years you've had a lot of conversations with CEOs and senior executives in your client companies. What have you noticed about the ones that have been better able to grow?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. When I look back and we look at the companies that we had the most success with, having an impact on their operations, I think there's a couple of things that stand out. I think number one, everyone that I talked to, they were in a learning mode versus just an execution mode. And I would say they're all willing to learn from anyone. And as you came in, we were an IT supplier, so we were technically focused and we could provide answers and questions about that. But we also did a lot around culture and leadership. And what I found is that the executives in the growth companies were more interested in the leadership and cultural conversations than they actually were in the technology conversations. I think they realized that the more they became equipped to deal with culture and actually managing and leading people on a day-to-day basis, the more effective they were, and they were able to grow. Then the technology would help them accelerate whatever they wanted to do. I think that was a big thing. They were this constant active learners. The other thing I think that really helped a lot of them is that I think when they, looking at their businesses, they were very willing to look at the brutal facts. This is a comment from Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. There's a lot of companies we met with and we talked with that felt that they were where they needed to be and there was nothing else they had to do down the horizon. The companies I saw the most success with, they were willing to take apart everything that they did and really examine it and be honest. Is it something they wanted to hang on to, or is it something they needed to really kind of look at changing and growing? And I found companies that would experiment. They would not necessarily just blow up everything they've done for the last 10, 15, 20 years, but they would experiment in small ways around these things that they kind of started having a different understanding around. So being able to apply this brutal fact, understanding that the business model was going to change, and to experiment their way into it was a really big combination that helped them be successful. The other thing I think that would also mark as a trait that I saw with the more successful companies is that they were very collaborative in nature. They'd be willing to share their strategic plan of where they're going. They're willing to talk about the things that weren't working well. They were willing to, kind of share information they had about the things that were working. So it was a really interesting dynamic. It wasn't like it was a vendor-supplier relationship. It's really about two peers having a high-level conversation about the future, where the businesses were going. And I think I grew as much as they did through those conversations, and it helped us be more on track to where we needed to be as a business to meet their ever-changing needs. So it was definitely an interesting journey with those clients that really embraced that part of the process.
In addition to the things that you mentioned, I would guess because you had these peer-to-peer relationships with people where you were talking strategy and you made it safe, they felt they could trust you to open up to you and talk with you. They also had those qualities like practical wisdom and humility. They were willing to listen to other people, but your willingness to go there, to create the peer-to-peer dialogue was a key part of your own growth, wasn't it?
I think that's a great observation. One of the things I think that really set our company apart, and I think me as a leader of our company apart, is that I really enjoyed those conversations. And when I embraced them, I had no other purpose in mind other than to have that conversation and to share knowledge into there. At the end of the day, did my business grow because of it? Absolutely. But I wasn't there to sell them more product. I wasn't there to sell more of whatever it was that was the popular item of the day. It was really to kind of have this conversation. And I think it takes a lot of authenticity to be able to sit down and have that kind of conversation. And I've had conversations with companies that I spent lots of times with that never ever translated into dollars, right? And that's okay. I would still have those conversations. I would do it all over again, knowing what I know now. But I think having those conversations with that kind of intent that this is really for the betterment of both of us really drove that kind of environment that created trust, that allowed us to be collaborative, allowed us to be vulnerable in some cases, because some of the things that we're doing on both sides weren't always the most perfect way of doing things, right? And when you articulate it to someone else, you realize, well, that sounds kind of not like what you should be saying. But and that led us to having these one-on-one conversations. But what I also did that I think really helped us is that probably about halfway through our lifetime, this idea of co-creation really took place. It's that we're creating something special here, this kind of relationship between our company and your company. We're creating products and services that meet your needs and your direction that you're trying to take your business. So what we did is we actually took what we're doing on one-on-one, and we actually created something called a client advisory board. And so we created a board that was about 20 people from different parts of the organization of our client base. And then what we did is we met quarterly. And we would share information here's all the things that we're doing. Here's what we're really good at. Here's the things that we're not so good at. Here are the things we're doing to get better. And I remember the first time I had this session, we actually videotaped it. And so we're just, I'm thinking I'm doing a really great job. And, so I'm in there all happy and pleased and started the meeting off. And then it turned out to a point for like an hour and a half where they just ripped us apart. And it was the most humiliating yet most rewarding experience I had in my life. And what I realized, the feedback I got was it wasn't based upon them trying to be angry with us or upset with us. It was all in the spirit of them helping us become better.
They wanted you to be a better partner.
They did. They saw that potential and opportunity in us, and they said, if you could just do these things better, you could become better. I could see how different leaders could respond to that feedback. Mm-hmm. They could become very defensive. They could become, take it that it wasn't worth the time and energy and just kind of ignored it. I took it to heart. I looked at it and said, there are some ways they said it, some of the examples they used that where we weren't in our best, maybe weren't exactly perfectly right, but there was a truth in what they said. And I think what happened at that first meeting, I think people walked away feeling bad that, well, this was supposed to be a feel-good session, and it turned out more of a complaining session and, providing a lot of constructive, with air quotations around it, feedback. But we came back the next quarter, and we said, here's what we heard, and we identified the 4 or 5 things that really resonated, and here's what we're doing about it. And from that point in time, it became very we were in it together.
Yeah.
And we were developing, building Atrion as a collective versus just, Tim's idea or Tim's team's idea or, whatever happened out there. It became a really cool experience.
That's fantastic. Well, I know how much you walk the talk when it comes to humility, not believing you have all the answers, and authenticity. You're just, really such a real person. From the minute I met you, I felt like we were friends, and resonance too. You just seem to be so attuned to other people, and those are qualities that, as you know, we measure in our executive presence model. Are there other qualities that you tend to look for when you're hiring, say, leaders for your leadership team, or people that you think are promising and could really take a big role in your organization?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest decisions any leader has to make is who they're going to hire to be on their team. I will tell you that we didn't have this perfect. Our first 15 years, we absolutely sucked at this. We basically spent time when we were interviewing people on resumes. Tell me what you did, tell me what certs you have, what schools you went to. And in our industry, we have an interesting environment. We have to provide a high degree of customer service, but we're also hiring people that are very technical, where customer service and client communications may not be their strongest strength or attribute. So we hired based on resumes and credentials and that kind of stuff, and I would tell you more times than not, we were bit. We hired really, really smart people, but they couldn't support the clients the way we need to support the clients. So we really took a step back. We went through a period of time where we had about 6 months of just one bad hire after another. And, I really got frustrated with it. It's like, how can we get this simple thing right? And what we ended up doing is reinventing our entire hiring process. And what we really did is we basically said there's really 3 attributes to an employee that we want to look at that we bring into the organization. The first is their technical acumen. We are a technical company, and I have to have people that understand technology and have to be fluent in it. We also are a company that has a high degree of professional requirements placed upon us. The ability to speak in public, the ability to provide customer service, critical thought, problem solving. Those softer skills, they don't show up on a resume. You can't really see them there. And that's a big part of our success. The people we saw that were very successful had those kind of skills, and they weren't just a little bit. They were really solid in those. They were high degree and high potentials in those areas. Then the last area was what we call character. And as we went through that, we started ranking that. We determined the most important attribute we had to have was character. And so we spend about 80% of our time interviewing for character. And it's not uncommon for an interview to occur where we're talking about your core values. And if you're going to interview for me in a leadership role, during your interview process, you would be required to put together a PowerPoint presentation on your core values. And that conversation, depending on how it goes, could be 1 hour to 3 hours in length. And when you'd come in, you'd give a 30-minute presentation, PowerPoint presentation in front of the room, which allowed us to gauge communication skills, some of the soft elements, how they interact with the room, how they build rapport, that were really important to us. But we got to see how people would present, how they would define themselves, which really what they believe in and what they stand for. And during that process, after they would be done, we'd start the interview process. And the interview process was about the core values. We'd have them give us examples of when they exhibited the core values and they actually, lived by it. We'd have them give us examples when they failed to meet that requirement and that obligation. We would have them give us very specific details. So that would be, well, I once had this customer, I'd want to know the customer name. I'd want to know the year that this happened. Who else was involved? And really just kind of get the details. And what you found during that process, there was a number of attributes that came up. You could see people that had a high degree of integrity. They took pride in the fact that they were values-driven. They took the time to understand their core values. They took the time to make decisions around core values. What I found during the interviewing portion around the core values is that there was a much stronger alignment between what they thought and believed, what they said, and what they actually did. And that to me is kind of a real good measure of integrity. So if you look at my leadership team and the people I hired, I would say the number one strength that all of them had, there was a high degree of integrity. I could always trust they would do the right thing no matter what. And that's not common in business as much as we would think it should be. So that was one of the top attributes and characteristics we looked for. I think the other thing, there were probably 3 that we looked at that was common across all of them. there was this willingness to be vulnerable. And that manifested itself in many ways, where people were willing to be honest about what they were good at, what they weren't so good at. Were they willing to embrace doing things that were uncomfortable and put themselves in positions where they were challenged for the sole purpose of just getting better? And people that looked at themselves and had that vulnerability were willing to do this without a lot of thought and consideration. It wasn't like a struggle. They were willing to step to that comfort zone. They were able to look at it. They were able to overcome their fears and uncertainty and take that next step. And what I found is that they've spent more time willing to be in what I call the learning zone than their comfort zone. And that really helped us as we were growing, because as much as I had to grow and evolve as a CEO, everyone of the leaders that were with me had to grow and evolve as we went along. And we had some leaders that were good when we were a 50-person company, but as we made that transition to a 100-person company, they weren't as effective. And they hadn't really learned the lessons they needed to be successful that new stage of their lives and their careers. So this ability to be vulnerable, I thought, was really something that the ones who were the most successful in our organization had the longest term and grew with us. There was a level of vulnerability. Then I would say the third thing that was interesting with all of them is this kind of high degree of resilience. The world isn't a perfect place. Everything doesn't go according to plan. And more often than not, something knocks you off your course. And it could be something as simple as the economy, taking a slight nosedive for a month or two. It could be a major recession that we go through. But the ability for people, when things aren't going perfect and when they do get knocked off course, the ability to kind of pick themselves up, not let that affect them, and get back in the game. I call it bouncing forward, right? They were able to bounce forward from that. Was an essential attribute that I think came through with all the people we hired. And to that end, when we faced really challenging times, one of the things that was really interesting with Atrion is that we didn't face the same struggles that other organizations face. When I look at 2000, which is one of the biggest recessions that hit our industry, in about an 18-month window from January 1 of 2000, 18 months later, my industry in New England decreased by about 35%. Sure. 35% of our business went out of business. If I look at 18 months after September 11th, so about 30 months or so after 2000, 65% of my competitors were gone. Now, the amazing part of that, we grew every year. Mm-hmm. And we grew at 20 to 40 to 50% rates depending on the years during that time period. It was because of our resiliency of our organization, our leaders. We were just able, no matter what happened, when we were able to bounce forward, we were able to readjust. We held nothing as sacred that we wouldn't touch and wouldn't do. So we were able to go through that. So those were the top three attributes I think I would look for in not engineers, and leaders in our organization. Yeah. And we were very successful finding a large number of those individuals.
When you talk about vulnerability and resilience, I can't help but remember that you're dyslexic, and yet I know you're a prolific writer and a blogger. And you're not, interestingly, the first CEO I've ever met who's had to overcome this. I mean, it can be very debilitating, but look at you, you're incredibly successful. And I think about, when you talk about resilience and vulnerability, I wonder how closely those values are associated with the struggles that you faced personally.
I think that's an interesting observation. I think if I look back on my life, part of it I was probably too dumb to realize I had a disability. So I give a lot of credit to that. But the interesting part is I learned to read from the age of 2.5 to 3, and I was reading at like a 6th grade level at that time. And I learned to read differently. And I don't know, I never learned phonetics. I still can't do phonetics. I've worked with a coach for a period of time trying to get better at that. But I can't really get the words and the syllables and all that stuff straight. So that's been really challenging for me. But I learned to sight read. And by the ability to sight read, it started with my mother making flashcards that she would tape, like, here's the word of a chair. And I'd be able to recognize the pattern, even though when I would try to write it down, my letters may not be in the right order. I'd still recognize the pattern of it. That allowed me to become very good at reading, which a lot of people that have dyslexia have a really hard time learning to read. So whatever happened those early years and how I was taught really helped me become successful to where today I read 800 words a minute.
That's
and I have
amazing.
Like a 92% retention rate. So I didn't really know I had a problem then, where I noticed it was speaking and writing. And all through elementary school, all through junior high school and high school, I really struggled. In my very first spelling bee, I got kicked out of the spelling bee because I couldn't, the very first word, second person out, I couldn't spell the word road. I had no idea. They gave me 3 chances, and every time it was a different spelling of the word road. And, so you take that, and, at the time when you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, it's really devastating not to be successful at things. So that was challenging all the way around, and, I avoided writing. I avoided, speaking in public. I would just miss 3 weeks of school so I wouldn't have to do an oral book report.
Wow.
Right? So I did all kinds of things like that.
So you were avoiding. So how did you learn to face it and bounce back? Like you say, bounce forward.
I would say my biggest challenge, where it started really with it, was around public speaking. I could get by enough with writing, and this is also pre-word processing. So, there was no spell checking. So I could get by enough with writing. It wasn't as bad as there was probably a D level work. If I really rated it, it probably was an F, but it wasn't, B or C work, level work. Public speaking, I really was awful at it. And I had to take a speech class. It was a requirement in high school. And I took the speech class, and I failed on every presentation. And I got to the halfway point, and I'm literally failing the program. And I didn't fail things traditionally. And so as I was going through this, I had to do a demo presentation. And the only thing that saved me from having a tremendously bad presentation is that I was into skateboarding. Oh. And I came back in, I said very few words, and all I did is demonstrate really wicked cool skateboarding tricks in the classroom. And so I ended up getting a pretty good mark on that. And I did well on a couple other ones, and I kept changing and experimenting with how I'd actually present. So whatever the assignment was, my way I approached it was completely different than what the assignment said to do. So I did one where I was almost a one-person play. Yeah. And, and I was able to be in costume, and I was behind the scenes, so it became a little bit more bearable. And then my last presentation was on fear, your greatest fear. And so I wrote a Stephen King-ish horror story. And my whole presentation was on that. And as I was doing the presentation, I was so nervous and so fearful of the whole thing. It came across like this was the most terrifying thing ever. And I ended up getting a really good grade on that.
I'll bet you did, yeah.
So I ended up getting a passing mark on that, passed the course, nothing to write home about. But I made a vow, I will never ever speak in public again.
Oh, no.
And so fast forward the clock, I joined the military, and they asked me to become an instructor. And I said no. I went on the program a little bit further. They asked me to be an instructor again. And I said no. Then finally I get my orders to go to my next base, and it was to go to Arizona.
To be an instructor?
No. To be just a regular guy.
Oh, okay.
Now, they trick you in the military. They give you this list. They said, here are all the bases you can go to. Pick your top 3. So I went over that list, top to bottom. I rank stacked it in the orders of the bases I want. I submit my 3. I didn't get my top 3. I got my last one. My last base to go to was Luke Air Force Base, Arizona. Now, I'm 17 years old, so when I think of Arizona, all I can think of is the Roadrunner cartoon, right? Coyotes and roadrunners and cactuses were all that I could think of. So after I got that order, I said I want to become an instructor. And so I could stay in Denver. Denver is much nicer than Arizona. So I went down that path, and I went through the program, and I got halfway through the program, and I was failing. And I had this moment where I had like my midterm presentation to do. And back in the day, you had 3x5 index cards with your notes on it. There was no PowerPoint. There was no cool technology to use. As I'm walking down the aisle to get on the stage to do my presentation, I trip, I fall, and the cards go flying all over the floor. And they're all out of order. And so I start to pick them back up, and I realize they're not numbered. And so I go up to the stage, I'm trying to put them in order, and my presentation just goes from bad to horrendously bad. And so I knew I failed that presentation. And so I went home that night and said, okay, I'm going to quit. Because if I quit, at least I haven't failed, right? So I basically convinced myself, that night that I'm just going to walk out of the program. I had the speech prepared of how I'm going to do it. I laid down about 11 o'clock to go to bed, and I woke up at 12. And I said, I've never quit anything in my life. I can't quit. And so I was literally up the entire night trying to say, well, how do I become successful? And what I realized, because I had issues, and I kind of knew I had dyslexia at the time. They talked a little bit to me when I was in the military about it, but I wasn't an expert on it. I didn't know the details behind it. but I knew I was different and I had challenges. I said, the way they're teaching me to present, I can't teach that. I can't do it that way. And I basically came up with two conclusions. I said, first of all, I'm a very visual person. So I think in pictures versus words. And if you look at how I started doing my presentation from that point on, basically in my mind, I had a PowerPoint slide deck in my mind, and I would just walk through that. And the second thing I realized is that I was really good at storytelling. And that if I could bring those two things together, I could become more effective. And as I did, during that program, I became more and more effective. I eventually passed the program and went on to become an instructor. And I became, at the time, the youngest master instructor in the history of the United States Air Force. And that really was it. But I realized that I had to learn different ways. And I think that whole idea of having to overcome these challenges and difficulties that you can't control and how to find creative ways to work around them has helped me as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. I don't look at challenges as problems. I look at them as opportunities to find a different way to do something. And that really helped frame the way Atrion operated for 30 years. And it helped us become very successful. So part of it does come back to overcoming some of these challenges.
It does, yeah. Anybody who knows you knows that you're an adventurer. You have hiked rim to rim the Grand Canyon, summited Kilimanjaro, trekked the Inca Trail in Peru, and climbed the Walloway Mountains in Oregon with ex-Special Forces military. That's crazy. Yeah. That was recent, too, right?
It was about a year ago.
Wow. So I know you're a real athlete as well as a corporate athlete, and one of the things about you is you have so much energy and so much passion. And I wonder what advice you have for, it doesn't matter whether you're an entrepreneur with your own business or a corporate executive or a leader. I mean, we all have to marshal our energy and passion every day. What advice do you have for people who are looking to have more of that?
So, people will tell you that my greatest curse in my life is having too much energy. So my wife will tell you, because I can't sit still. I don't sleep much, so I sleep 4 hours a night if I'm lucky. So I'm just constantly on the go, and I've been this way since the day I was born. So I was blessed with that. So I don't know how that happened, what gives me that kind of energy. I hope it lasts as I age and get older and I can have a long, meaningful life. What I would say that when I look at it, to me, what helps me take that energy and marshal it in a way that becomes more positive for me as an individual and as a leader and as a business owner is that understanding why I do the things that I do. I'm a big believer that nothing in life is ever done easily without having purpose or meaning behind it. And from a very young age, I kind of found meaning in everything I do. And so for me, when I was younger, it was about producing quality work and doing things at a level that no one else was willing to do. And I took great pride in that. And as I got older, I realized that really what excited me in life was being able to inspire people. I believe that we all have the ability to bring our A game every day, and we all have our moments where we struggle with things, but that ability to kind of persevere through them and get better because of those moments, we all have that ability. And how can we help inspire ourselves to do that? So for me, it's really about inspiration. And when I look at things like climbing Kilimanjaro, it's athletic, it's adventuresome, there's a lot of people that wouldn't want to climb Kilimanjaro. It's not the mountain, it's not the physical activity. Each of us have our own things that we can do to challenge ourselves. Whether it's learning to write your first book or write your first blog, whether it's learning to learn a new language or play a different instrument or just starting a family. We each have those things that push us and challenge us. And I think that for me, that my inspiration and my energy helps me find those things that really challenge me. And every time I do those events, whether it's doing the rim to rim crossing or climbing Kilimanjaro or doing even smaller things, I learn something about myself I didn't know before. And it helps me become better. It helps me become a bigger person to see the world in a different direction. And I think that for me, it's helped me really kind of grow as time goes on. And I can see when I don't do that for a period of time where, for lack of a better term, I start to stagnate. I kind of get stuck in a rut. And I think a lot of people live in that rut on a day-to-day basis because they're not out there trying to challenge themselves. And so for me, I find the passion in doing that. Then consequently, because I do some of these things, I'm able to, when I'm working with people to help them develop as better leaders, they help me provide examples and metaphors to how they can actually take on their own kind of challenges, whatever that happens to be, to push themselves to become stronger, become more effective, to become a more responsible leader as time goes on.
So while you're continuing your work with Carousel, who bought your company, you've also started a new company. And I can't imagine you ever retiring, knowing you as I do. But that's really taking on a lot. And I know it was a bit of a spin-off from your old company. But tell me a little bit about that company, and then why are you taking that on? What's your mission now?
Yeah. So the company I've spun off is, if you define it in its truest sense, it's a custom software development company. So we help companies solve business problems with custom software. Our fundamental belief when we started the company was that you had all these tools that companies buy, these software products. They buy them, and most of these software products do 80% of what I needed to do. However, the most important part of my business is that other 20%. And the software products usually don't meet that need. Then on top of that, most of the companies that are out there, because they've grown or because they're started, they're bootstrapping themselves, or they're so big, the processes that they need to run their business on are broken. So when I started the company, that was what I wanted to solve, is that problem with, we had incomplete softwares that didn't solve what the customer or business needed. And then we had these broken processes. So how could a company like Trilix go in and actually solve that problem for the client? So we basically created a business model that really focused on how do we go in and help the client understand their business challenges. And what we found is that and what we still find every day, is that most clients complain around a lot of things that don't work in their business, but they don't know how to define it. So the biggest part of what we do today is go in and help clients understand what the problem really is, and help them define it in an unemotional, unblame-oriented kind of session, just to say, these are the brutal facts. This is where you're at right now today. And then, without providing a solution, just to get that all on the table, then we start talking about where do you want to be. And once we're able to understand this is where you're at and this is where we want to be, we can then figure out how we actually solve that gap. And then sometimes it's about helping them to rethink the processes that they do. And we will then connect with the people that can actually come in and help them map the processes, help them get more efficient in doing that. Sometimes it leads to software development. Sometimes it leads to helping them focus more on the people and culture side of the business. The tools aren't bad, the processes aren't bad, it's the culture is not where it needs to be. So we spent a lot of time doing those kind of things. So when I started, it was a spinoff. We did software development in Atrion. It was a very, very small part of our business. We had about 10 people devoted to that. So when I was looking at doing this and I saw the need, I saw that the Carousel merger, they didn't really see the value in that software development, and they really weren't going to invest in it going forward. I took that opportunity to say, listen, there's a business need here. Let's start a new business. And so we started the business in May. So we just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. And for the first 4 months or so, we kind of were in stealth mode. We basically had deals that we had engaged with Carousel. And what we did is we just focused on completing those jobs. And we wanted to make sure there was no conflict of interest, that there was no drop-off in quality. If anything, the quality would improve with what we're doing. So in August, we went live with our company. We actually went out and started recruiting our first clients. We got our first clients in the September timeframe, and the business has been building ever since that. And what we're really trying to do with the business, other than doing custom software and helping clients solve business problems, we really want to go into this whole co-creation environment with our clients, really help them understand how to turn their businesses from wherever they are now to really solid, efficient running organizations that's balanced between operations and culture, and that technology is used to accelerate the process. That's really what we're trying to accomplish. And it's been an amazing journey. It's been only a year, but the amount that we've learned in the process has been overwhelming. And we're going to have a growth company now. We have a growth impairment with Trilix. We're hoping to break $3 million in revenue this year, so from nothing to $3 million. And our average deal size is relatively small. We're probably between $30,000 to $70,000 as an average deal size. So it's a lot of small deals, a lot of effort to do that. And we have high aspirations of where we want to be the next 5 to 10 years. So.
Well, I have a feeling I'll be telling your next growth story soon. Tim, thank you so much. What a wonderful interview. And I know it's been an inspiring one, not only for CEOs and senior executives who are trying to figure out the growth story, but for everybody at every age who's trying to find meaning in their careers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you.